Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the intricacies of workplace dynamics. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Humanist. As the little intro said, super excited today. I've got a new friend here as my guest today. Somebody I've met through Initiate Connections, a speaker, kind of a speaker program support group, and kind of a track to grow your speaker business on. Terry and I met there, and it's been a great pre-chat, learning a little bit more about Terry and talking about the jar journey that I made and all the questions are in this jar and the conversations that it leads to, and the opportunities it afforded me the last couple of years to really open up my humanist side and really meet people who, despite adversity, are flourishing or on the path to flourishing. And boy, Terry, can't think of another person that's gone through some rough stuff, like your story, and really are flourishing. It seems you've really found your sweet spot, turned, some adversity and some personal challenges into a message. And I think you're touching people, touching a lot of people from the stage right now. And you've got your new book coming out, and want to hear more about that. But first, Terry, welcome to the Humanist. Thanks for taking time out of the day, and maybe share a little bit of how did you end up here as a speaker? What was why? And did you imagine that when you were 28 years old or 22 years old?
Never. But first of all, yeah. Hey, Ken, thanks so much for having me as a guest. And the answer to that is absolutely no. When I sort of went through a journey that had me living life on easy street, and then sort of I went down a dark path, and it took a while for me to come back up the other side. But maybe before my adversity, I might have been somebody that would have felt confident on a stage, but certainly not after what happened to me. And so that's really the transformation that took place. So yeah, do you want me to just kind of talk about, kind of what happened real quick, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Give a little flavor for the background, because I think that sets the stage for the second part of the conversation.
Yeah, so this is dating back to the 80s. And I was a senior at UC Berkeley. I was living a pretty easy life, I would say.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, a lump formed behind my right nostril. And honestly, I didn't even notice it, Ken. It took a couple other people to say, "Hey, what's going on with your nostril? Looks like it's flared out." And I'm like, God, how did I shave every morning? How did I brush my teeth and not even see it? So I was somewhat oblivious. But long story short is I ultimately got diagnosed with this incredibly rare form of cancer called a fibrosarcoma. Sarcomas in and of themselves are pretty rare, but a fibrosarcoma is very, very rare. And on top of that, they typically occur in arms and legs and not in the head and neck. And mine happened to originate in my right maxillary area, kind of behind my right cheek.
Okay.
And so initially it really wasn't a huge ordeal, Ken. I mean, they figured out what it was. They said, yeah, this is a really aggressive form of cancer, but it looks like we caught it early. We can surgically remove this, and you'll be hopefully in pretty good shape. Well, 6 months later, it came back with a vengeance. And At that point, that's when my whole world changed. And I went into a procedure that necessitated the removal of half of my nose, the shelf of my right eye, the muscle and the bone for my right cheek, part of my upper lip, part of my hard palate, and 6 of my teeth. And so I woke up in this hospital room, literally attached to my chest, because they had transplanted a full thickness skin graft from my chest to fill in this huge cavity on my face. That's the way they did things back in the 80s. They don't really do that anymore. But
almost sounds a little bit barbarian there.
Yeah, it's definitely what you say. I mean, it's I would say shortly after that they stopped using that type of procedure for myriad reasons. But anyway, I kind of instantly was this guy who was a homecoming prince in high school to this elephant man, really. I mean, I frightened people when I walked down the hallways at UC San Francisco's hospital there. So, yeah, and then the journey began. You know, a new journey of my life began at that point.
That is, and what was it like looking? I mean, you're a young guy, like you said. We're handsome when we're young, and you look in the mirror. What did you feel? I mean, what are you thinking when you wake up and look at yourself? At maybe a few months after, and you're kind of there alone after the fanfare, after the get well cards are done.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You know, my doctor basically told me that he would get me back to what I looked like before. And I believe that he confidently in his heart believed that they could do that, because there were many patients that, you know, go through these weird kind of ordeals that they can reconstruct and get back to who they were. Well, my case was far more complicated, but I didn't know that then, Ken. So for me, if you ask me, you know, how I felt a couple months later, I still felt like I was this 21-year-old guy that was invincible and that I was going to still conquer the world, that I was going to get reconstructed back to who I was. And for whatever reason, the cancer really wasn't that big of a concern, because at that point they felt like, hey, we got the margins. We feel we've caught this cancer this time. We've gone way more aggressive than the last time. And you're going to get back to your normal life. You're going to be able to finish Cal. You're going to be able to go on and do whatever you want. And so I maybe naively believe that. But what's interesting is that despite my reaction and response to that, I'm grateful to this day that I was somewhat naive and that I believed in this hope, because that's really what kept me going, right? And I never it took me a while to figure out that I wasn't going to be what I often call the old Terry, you know.
Whew. And then, so did you go back to school? Did you finish school, or?
I did. At that point they did need to do radiation therapy, so I had that. And then but I did return to school as soon as I could, and I got my degree at Cal. And I began to realize that this process was going to take a lot longer than I originally thought. Mm-hmm. So that's really when I began to lose my confidence. That's when I began to shut myself out from other people. I didn't want to go out with my friends anymore. I didn't want to go to parties anymore. You know, so I began to change who I was in a really negative way, and I couldn't help myself. I just didn't feel content anymore, and I just didn't have a timeline for when I was going to get back to who I was. But they kept doing procedures, and I kept being hopeful. They sent me to what I would say at the time were the best and the brightest specialists that, you know, had specific sort of expertise in certain parts of the face.
Right.
You know, you'd have a craniofacial guy that kind of looked at the skull, and then you had somebody else that was strictly a nasal guy. So there was a lot of things going on, and it took really, Ken, over the course of 6 years, I had 25 more reconstructive procedures. And that's really, you know, when I began to realize that I was not going to get to who I wanted to be, and I needed to figure out another path. And I was just fortunate that I was open-minded, and that people along the way inspired me, and that I had some critical turning points that I just, you know, I don't take credit for it. I sort of fell into it. I think I just had some lucky breaks along the way that fortunately helped me understand where I was, and the only way I was going to get to a place of contentment and happiness was if I started to work on myself, not on the outside, but on the inside.
That's that's an interesting way to go to learn that, you know.
Yeah.
I think as we talked offline, I think there's probably ways you would prefer to learn that.
Yeah.
Or people would imagine they would prefer to learn it a different way. But also, like we talked about, you wouldn't change things because it did make you a very different person in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made me who I am today, which is a better person, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. A better person than the original Terry.
Yeah.
That's funny how we imagine what life is going to be like, or to a degree, and then stuff happens and we end up totally different place than where we thought we'd be. But it's interesting. You can look at yourself today and say, yeah, I wouldn't have gotten here on the other path.
Yeah. I was listening, just on the side, I was listening to a podcast. Anderson Cooper has a podcast called All There Is. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have, yeah.
But I believe it's one of the podcasts where he interviews this other guy, and they talk about adversity. And this guy basically says, people that haven't gone through adversity oftentimes are the most miserable, unhappy people I've ever met. He was kind of joking in a way, like the way he was expressing himself, but I was listening pretty closely, and it's like, I know what he was saying. He was saying, he was a medical doctor. He encountered all kinds of people with all kinds of issues, and felt like whenever he met people that hadn't been through anything, they just wasn't that they weren't interesting people, but they didn't strike him as happy people. And maybe that's just because they never found their own purpose. They didn't uncover something that became incredibly important to them as a result of something that they experienced. I don't know. Interesting perspective.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a combination of conversations I've had, but where this idea or the word phrasing has come from. But it's, we look at things and we say, this has happened to me, right? Something's happened to me. And it's and now what I've come to realize is things happen for us. And, so for somebody like yourself in your situation, it could have happened to you, and you could be a really bitter person and a recluse.
Yeah.
And what you've kind of found is that it happened for you to give you a different perspective. And now you're turning it into a real purpose of sharing that perspective with other people. So, maybe they don't have to go through what you've gone through, or they've gone through something in their own way, their own experience, and they'll be more comfortable with it by seeing somebody else, real life, coming out the other side, living the purpose and sharing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about a question from the jar?
Let's see what you got.
Let's go for a question from the jar. So this is just a reminder, is a jar of 444 questions I used on my podcast called The Jar, traveling to people's homes. Made it to 96 cities, 323 interviews.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a fun journey. So question from the jar for Terry. Someone with an open and loving heart brings positive energy everywhere they go. Do you know someone like this?
Yeah, I just was with a person that I would say meets that exactly last week. And she was a woman that was diagnosed. She was having her marriage was not going great. And then she gets diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had young kids.
Oof.
She's incredibly grateful for her experience because it completely changed who she was, to the point where she talks about how happy she is and what a great mom she's become. And she's just driven by this new purpose to help other women with breast cancer. And she's just on this fast track to deliver essential tools and helpful, a helpful kit, really thoughtful things for people that are going through breast cancer. And she's just so full of positive energy. It was just heartwarming to be around her. So
Yeah. It I mean, we are energy, right, essentially, and so when you're in a room with somebody who's has extra and they're not matter, right? They haven't closed their energy into themselves, but they're actually, expressing and they've got this energy field which fills the room
yeah,
sometimes. And it's a real thing.
yeah.
Tell
I
me.
don't know if I answered the question exactly, but
Yeah, no, it's perfect. It's perfect. The questions are prompts. And
yeah,
sometimes black and white. The part that's a joy is knowing somebody interpreted the question slightly different than you, and they
yeah,
have their own conversation about their own person that they know. And
yeah,
so it's a there's a couple hundred of those happening, as people listen to this. It just kind of goes
yeah,
out there. Tell me a little bit about your public speaking. What have you been? How did you? Maybe a short one is how did you get into it? Was it accidental or intentional? And then, what have you been
yeah,
speaking on? And then maybe we'll
yeah,
talk a little bit later about what you're, where you're headed.
yeah. Perfect. So it's a. I'll try to keep the answer not too long, Ken. But
That's okay.
I would say that how I got into speaking was something we kind of touched on, I think, before we started the session here, which is that I I was on this journey to uh, try to figure out how I was going to navigate life as this different person, and it took me many years to come to terms with who I was and to
Yeah.
get find tools and turning points that helped me move in the right direction. But eventually, I got to this point of what I call contentment, where I felt pretty comfortable with who I was again, and a lot of that had to do, Ken, with I went into high tech marketing and sales, and I went into an area where it sort of forced me to be public, right? I wasn't
Yeah.
a coder sitting at a desk, but I didn't really intend to do that. But I found myself in that place. But I was still, I would say, insecure about getting in front of big groups of people. And the weird thing is, I was insecure because I thought, oh, they're going to judge me for the way I look. Instead of thinking about, well, if I have something interesting to say or I have something valuable to share, that's all that should matter, right? Well, I wasn't in
Right.
that place, but when I the reason I talk about getting to that point of contentment was when I got to that place, um, I had already started to write my first book, but it was more of just a cathartic exercise, right? It was just
Yes.
sharing,
Yes.
writing things down and stream of consciousness. But I had to shelf it for several years because I was like, well, this isn't an inspirational story. This doesn't have a positive close. So I put it on the shelf. Well, when I finally got to that point where I started to feel like, hey, I'm proud of who I am, I finished the book. And as you know, because you've written books, when you publish a book, suddenly, at least I found a lot of people wanted me to speak to them, wanted me to speak to their
Yeah.
groups, their associations, their companies. And I sort of had never anticipated that. I'm like, well, I could do some, book events at bookstores, but I never really thought about, oh, they actually want me to come to their organization, to their hospital, to their company. And so um, I really, to me, that was a whole new challenge. Like, okay, how am I going to build my confidence up to feel good about who I am on this stage and share my story? And I felt a big responsibility because I wanted to
Yes.
provide value, and I wanted to make sure that what I delivered was good and powerful and all that. So for me, a lot of the frameworks that I talk about that help me get through it is I'm very big on focus and goal setting and all this kind of stuff, and not in a way of overwhelming ourselves with goals, but sort of figuring out what's your BHAG or your big, hairy, audacious goal, figuring what is the most pressing issue I have and trying to make a plan for that. And when you do it that way, it's achievable in my mind. It's like, okay, one step at a time, I'm going to measure along the way. And so I took each speech that came out of that book very seriously in terms of preparation. And every time I did one, I felt better. And that helped to rebuild my confidence. And then I began to realize this is really cathartic in and of itself, let alone if I'm inspiring people and helping other people with their own lives, what a gift. And so that's how it started. And I continued, Ken, to stay in the high tech world all the way up into, I'm still doing it actually. So public speaking and that and writing has kind of been an adjunct to that other life. And so I do it, not regularly. It's not my core being or my core career, but I think that's good for me because it keeps me energized. It keeps me engaging because I'm not doing it 3 times a week. I'm doing it, once a month or once every 2 months. So, yeah, that's how it's gone. And it's always kept me grounded. It's always reminded me of the importance of the battle scars that I have and the value in my adversity that I can give back. And that's the greatest reward, is that I can do that. And I think fortunate to be able to share that story and share lessons and messages that I think can help pretty much anybody,
What's the one person you think of, the one person that came up to you, the one that's still sticking in your mind, right? After a speech and said something to you and, kind of touched you?
It's a great question because I didn't necessarily think that speaking to students was going to be a path, high school students was going to be a path that I would go down, because I remembered myself at that age being somewhat aloof and oblivious and not really somebody that paid attention to some guy that would come into an assembly and speak to him about whatever. But I remember, so I started to speak to high schools, and this kid came up to me who was clearly, and he was the first kid up in the line. And when he saw that there were other kids behind him that wanted to ask questions, he said, "Can I wait? I want to talk to you at the end." Because I don't think he felt comfortable in front of this group of kids sharing what he was going to share. But I could tell he was very shy. He seemed rather like myself at one point when I was really insecure and didn't hold my head up high. Well, it turned out he had ADHD. We ended up talking, and he had ADHD, and he was really bullied in school and all this kind of stuff. And he just looked at me and he was like, "You don't know how impactful that was to me. And you don't know how much that helped me." I was crying, and I could tell that it was really hard for him to share that, but it felt like a breakthrough in many ways. And, what better to help a kid that's 15 years old, as opposed to anybody else. It's like, this kid he is going down one path or another right now. And he is developing as we sit here and look at him in the eye. And I was like, man, that's wonderful. What else can I share with you? So that was probably the one thing that sticks out.
Yeah, there's always going to be that moment, one of those moments. I'm sure you got several, but that I thought that might be an interesting one, especially for you, because dealing with what you've dealt with, finding a high school kid, and I'm sure if one came up to you, had the courage, there's 100 that have left the rooms feeling that, but kind of too shy, like you said, to get in line, or didn't want to stop by to share.
And just I think being able to even touch one person in a high school audience, knowing how I used to be and how my friends used to be, and we were not attentive, we were not trying to pick up nuggets necessarily, but people are in all different places at different stages of their life. So if you can touch them at that point when they're vulnerable and when they're listening and open, that's where the gift is the most powerful to me.
Yeah, it's a gift. Let's do another question. Then I want to come back to your new book, and because you shared it, kind of, what you started speaking at, and kind of what you've morphed into now might not be the same thing, and time for another book.
Yeah. What do you got?
It's fascinating to me, as I did a lot of speaking for work, and what's often what you intend to say and the message that you're thinking about when you get to an event, and maybe for yourself, you're a keynote, and you listen to a few other people speak, you see the agenda, maybe you have lunch with some of the team, and then you get on the stage and you realize, I actually have to kind of change the message.
Yeah.
And so I think over time that happens to us, and your ideas evolve. The more you present, the more your ideas evolve, and you end up with some more wisdom, if you will, from listening to people and hearing what people need. Let's come back to that real quick. Another question from the jar. Oh, this is when things don't go as you planned, how do you talk to yourself? What's that?
When things don't go as planned,
as you planned, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep that? How do you keep that momentum going? Because this is life, right? This is such a life hack.
So I step back. I've been fortunate that reflection is something I learned about through my ordeal, that there was incredible importance to reflection. And so I step back and it helps me to calm myself and level set. And I think about this framework that I built for myself that I can now share with other people, which is a whole set of principles. And I think that's the whole point, right? And I share this with people. It's like, you got to have a toolkit that, you can turn back to at different points in your life, because unfortunately, when things don't go the way you expect them to, you're not always as clear-headed. Things don't come to you naturally like they might when you're in a good place.
Interesting.
And so I think you have to remind yourself of what got me to where I was. How did I get through another challenge in my life, or some other ordeal that didn't go the way I hoped it would? How did I do it then? And is there anything that I've gotten complacent about and stopped doing or thinking about? And that can be as simple things. There's people that I run into all the time. It's like, well, yeah, I used to do meditation, but I got too busy and I stopped doing it. Or I used to do yoga, or used to do visualization, but I just don't have time anymore. But those are kind of practices that I think can really work and help you kind of work through things, and reflection is to me is a big part of that.
Yeah, I think I think for me also, what I've learned, and sometimes is I might be trying to force things, why are things not going the way I planned? And is it me? Am I forcing something that's off timing or off mark? And it's sometimes a good chance to step back and then, like you said, open up that toolkit and start to run through and say, what's going on here? Did I have the wrong plan? Did I have the wrong direction? Am I expecting too much too soon? Am I forcing stuff sometimes? I think is probably, for me, my biggest lesson is a little more patience to let things play out.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of stepping back, like you say, right? I mean, sometimes, we think we have all the answers, but maybe we don't, and we need to course correct. Other times, it's just stepping back, like you say, and realizing that, hey, maybe this isn't going the way I expected, but it's only been 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yes.
Let me just keep pushing through this. I'm going to see results.
Yeah.
But
It's a good spot to ask yourself, am I
yeah,
just step back and I'll just be patient, keep going, stay the course, or is it time to adjust course?
and I think also what plays into that, if you're the kind of person that's comfortable with this, is it's talking to other people about it too. Some
Right.
people
Yes.
don't feel they feel too vulnerable in that position, or it makes them look weak or something. But
Yes.
that's why you have a support system, and run stuff by other people that are mentors, or your spouse or your partner or whatever, and get those different perspectives. Sometimes they can get you back on track, they can remotivate you, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I love that. Tell me about what you're thinking about with the new book, as you've kind of, you've been speaking from the stage for a while, listening to, or asking questions and kind of those before you get on the stage when you get a client and you're trying to figure out what they need from you, what's the message they need today, and I'm sure the feedback you start evolving. So you're now some time thinking about the new book, and as you mentioned to me, people are saying, "Hey, you're speaking about this, but I don't see that in your
Yeah.
book." So
Yeah.
tell me, let's spend 20 minutes talking about the new ideas, the new book. Where you headed?
Yeah. So I would call this new book part memoir, part self-improvement. And my first couple books were really memoirs, right? They were about what happened to me and how I came out of it. But
Okay.
they didn't really get into, there wasn't research around it.
Mm,
Primary research from other experts in the field. There wasn't uh, really a framework for it. Wasn't academic in any way to say, hey, these were the things that helped me get through this stage of my journey. It was more just a tell-all, right?
yes.
And so, to your point, as I speak to audiences, I would get this feedback regularly. They'd say, "But like, I read your book before, we heard you speak, and you talk about a lot of stuff that would be really useful for other people to learn from." And a lot of people said I should write a workbook, with exercises for how to examine what's going on and how to ask yourselves the right questions to um, help yourself navigate through an ordeal. So I finally, it's been brewing for years and years, and I finally had a gap where I said, I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna write this book, and I'm gonna focus on it and get it done. And the concept, Ken, is really that it's about, think of it as it's sort of like from trauma to triumph, and it's about how to overcome
Mm,
adversity, how to rebuild confidence for purpose, happiness, and success. That's kind of the concept for it. And within that, when I say it's part memoir, I share my own story, and psychologists might write similar types of books like this, right? But it's more of, I don't have a PhD, I don't have an MD, I'm not an RN. Mine's based on my own experience, and it's talking with other people and doing research on my own. But it's this idea of this framework that I built, and it's the acronym is PRIMO, and it represents 5 key principles in how to uh, face challenges, how to deal with adversity, and
mm,
importantly, how to rebuild confidence. Because unfortunately, a lot of times when we deal with a major adversity in our lives, we lose confidence. Our
yes.
self-esteem is impacted. So, in order to become happy and content and successful, not in a financial way, but successful in how you measure your own life, you have to feel good about yourself. You've got to be confident. So that's what it entails. And that framework, those 5 principles, the P for Primo is preparation. The R is reflection. The I is iteration and improvement. the M is really where the rubber meets the road, and that's motivation and action. And then finally, optimization, and that's how we optimize our lives for purpose, really. And that's kind of the point at which, it's still a cycle. We're still going to learn and change and improve as we go. But if you follow this kind of number of steps, you'll always have something to fall back on that I think can work in just about any type of situation based on the people I've talked to. And I could talk about what those things actually mean, but yeah, that's basically the concept. And so within that, I guess to finish on that, within that, it starts with, it's kind of my story, which leads into my framework. And then what I do is I talked about research, but I also talked to a lot of people who dealt with all kinds of adversity, very different than my own. Some of it's everything from a learning disability to a traumatic brain injury to being burned to being trafficked, right? And so how did these people deal with their adversity? What were their coping mechanisms and skills? And what I learned, Ken, is that a lot of them fall into my framework the same way. And so that was kind of the research that I wanted to do to kind of validate, is this something that works outside of me, myself, and I?
Yeah. Well, that'll give you a lot of confidence getting on the stage to share it. That you've done a little bit of the sniff test on it and a little bit more and then it's okay, sounds good, give a little further, go a little further. And is that the structure of your talk now? Are you sharing this framework already, or is it bits and pieces of it informal, like not in a bit informal?
You got it. It's a bit more informal. I kind of struggle with that, right? It's like, I think there's a place and an audience for a more formal structure to it. But I think in many cases, I just kind of want to share the story and share the lessons and hope that people understand that a lot of these things can help them in their own journeys. And so, yeah, I think it depends on the audience a little bit, but I think I'm moving in that direction for sure.
Yeah.
I'm still at that point where, I get asked a lot, as hard as I try to ask the questions of my clients about what is it that they really want me to talk about, what are the pain points they're experiencing, other than the kind of key messages that I already covered, they basically usually tell me, tell us your story. And so, I don't want to get too, like we said, too academic about it. And so I just share the story, and all of this stuff comes out in it in some way, shape, or form.
I think it's a great lesson for any speaker. It is what do people really want? They do want us. I mean, storytelling is old as the ages, right? Before we had books, storytellers were, people that you paid gold to come and, to tell you a story or tell you travel stories, faraway places, experiences you never had or could never had based on where you live. And so you're giving people a story that, that they haven't gone through. Maybe they know somebody, or maybe they have gone through their own version of it, their own painful kind of journey. And so it is about that overcoming. And maybe you're right, being too technical and too academic will lose its appeal, lose that people ability to absorb it and pay attention. I do think there's an opportunity to put that part of it, though, to open that part up when you as you get this down, is to put that on a website as a course. This might be the course you could put together.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's a great idea. I think with each part of it within the book, there is what I call putting it into practice. So how do you actually the idea is not to just like share all this stuff and then expect people to miraculously use it, but what are the questions you got to ask yourself and answer to figure out how this framework could work for me, because I'm not trying to tell you these are the only things that are going to work. No, these are the questions you need to ask yourself, and that's how you're going to come up with a method that's going to help you get through whatever your ordeal is at the time. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Give us a little bit of the M. Give us a little bit of the M. What is, give us a little bit around the motivation.
Yeah, so as I said, that's really where the rubber meets the road, and
Yeah,
that's where
so I wanted to go there.
you gotta actually start taking actions. And so this is hard for a lot of people, right? Because sometimes they feel, paralyzed by whatever they're going through, and it's hard for them to move forward. They're all consumed by what's happened to them, and so they now can't think clearly, they can't act clearly. But yeah, you gotta challenge yourself. And so I think, part of motivation and action is, okay, it's time to face your challenges. So how do you face challenges? And for me, I talked about this a little bit with the speaking thing, how that was facing a challenge for me, to actually become somebody that wanted to speak. So there's to me, it ties around a lot of focus and goal setting, but in a way that's not overwhelming. Like, Ken, one of the things that I laugh at is you were in the corporate world as I was, right? And there were many leaders that would talk about, oh, it's, beginning of the year, we need to have New Year's resolutions. And, it'd be like, oh, come up with 5 or 10, and it'd be like, nobody's ever going to succeed with 5 or 10 New Year's resolutions. That's my opinion, right? Let's come up with one. Let's come up with one and focus on it.
But see if we can actually do one. Let's see if we can actually do one.
Yeah. So facing challenges, taking control. So focusing on what you can control, setting aside the things you can't control. And I talk a lot about finding outlets, Ken. So employing outlets in your life. So these are things like, it can be a hobby. It could be something you want to learn. It could be something that you enjoy, or something that you did enjoy before whatever happened. And so it's making sure that you take time out of your day to get away from the stress, the daily stressors that this ordeal is causing. And it's a lot about refreshing and renewing. And I think it doesn't take that long to form a habit, but once you start doing something that requires focus outside of your own pain that you're experiencing, it starts to change your whole perspective. So I talk a lot about that. And then therapy, so group therapy, individual therapy, that became incredibly powerful to me. And then we touched on this as well. For motivation and action. The last piece is visualization, positive imaging. It can be meditation, it can be yoga, but not saying do all these things, but consider these things, and maybe some of these things might help you. They don't take that much time. It's really about trying things out and seeing what makes you feel better. And there's a little bit of discipline. Yeah. I mean, you got to do things for a little while to figure out whether it's the right thing or not. Don't knock yourself out if you hate it. That's just not making your life any better. Move on to something else. Be flexible. We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
So those are kind of some of the concepts.
Yeah. You'd mentioned when people get stuck in that hindbrain survival mode. And whatever's happened, they're still tied to that event, tied to that thing that happened. And, you really are you're in survival mode. You're literally in survival mode. And how to break that cycle. I agree. It's visualization, meditation, or doing something different than what you do every day. You have to, you can't wake up and think about stuff that, that happened to you and, then go validate that with other examples, and relive the experience and revalidate your emotions.
Yeah.
absolutely break out of that cycle somehow. I don't, whatever it is, you got to do something. Go buy a guitar, join Toastmasters, join a knitting club, go learn do something really weird that's just so far outside your
Totally.
normal, and
Totally.
and just
I,
start something your brain into where your brain is going. This is not what we do at 4:00.
right.
We're usually on SMS with other people commiserating. What are you doing in the pottery class?
Right.
And
Right.
you're meeting new people who have no idea what your story is, don't care about your story, aren't going to validate your story, and
Yeah.
they're worried about what clay you're using,
Yeah.
and just completely break that, get out of that reptilian brain, and start to get into learning something new, doing something different, and just
Yeah.
jar that cycle, break that cycle.
It's interesting you throw out guitar, because that was one of my outlets that I employed, because I'm not musically inclined naturally. Like, I'm not somebody that can listen to a song, even to this day. I mean, occasionally I can pick up certain chords, but for the
Okay.
most part, I couldn't listen to a song and say, okay, it's a C,
Yeah.
G
Yeah.
minor,
No
G.
idea. Me
No.
too.
So I had to, when I took up guitar and I practiced every night, that was my outlet in the evenings at the end of my workday to kind of, get de-stressed. But the reason I loved it was it required 100% focus. So when I was doing
Yes.
it, I wasn't
Yes.
thinking about, oh God, I got to send Ken that email.
No.
I got to call Ken after this call about that meeting that we got tomorrow morning. No, I was like, how do I get from this chord to the next chord? And how do I
Yes.
play this? What's the strum pattern on this song? And it
Oh,
sounds like minor stuff, but man, it's like there's nothing else on your mind.
so that's funny. We both have the guitar story.
Oh, really? You
Yeah.
too?
Mine was unfinished business. I had picked it up twice, and I should say I picked it up once when I was very young, and
Uh,
dropped that for trumpet, and
okay.
later bought a guitar, had great intentions when I bought it, and then loaned it to somebody, never saw it again.
Oh,
Uh,
no.
yeah, and so I finally decided I was gonna do it. At 52, I was gonna play guitar. I was gonna give it a year,
Yeah,
or 2 years was my contract with myself.
that's
And,
good.
is it interesting side story, and we'll come back to do another question, and then we'll kinda wrap things up, but I went to the Guitar Center. It's Guitar Center is a
Yeah,
big guitar shop, and I was walking
where I
around there.
bought my guitar. Yeah,
Oh, I love it. So those
yeah,
rooms, and you're in
yeah,
this fish tank room of beautiful instruments, and
yeah,
no idea what I was doing, and kind of regretting my choice at this point because I was super intimidated,
yeah.
and I ended up face to face with this guy, and he looked like, some old rock star from at least about my age, and but he's just so comfortable sitting there holding a guitar, strumming it, and I ended up face to face with him, and I'm just blurted out, "This is what I'm doing. I'm here to buy a guitar. I don't really know what I'm doing. You got any advice for me?" And he just looks at me and goes, "Get the red one." And, of course, it's like kind of my brain kind of just went, "What in the like, that was not in the answer. Let me check
Yeah,
AB." It's not even a combination of C and D. There's no
yeah,
multiple choice question here that says get the red one. And,
right.
what he explained was get the one that you can't take your eyes off of, the one you wanna
Okay,
hold forever. And even
okay.
across a
Interesting,
crowded room, it's all you can see is that.
interesting,
And,
interesting.
what a prophetic moment for me.
Yeah,
And that led me to meet a person who forced me to write songs, and that ended up making me pull my book out of the files and to start writing the book
okay.
again.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and it's a wow. I mean, it's a wow story in a way that I think it just reminds us that go do that thing that you wanted to do always, that's unfinished business,
Absolutely.
or go do the random thing you never thought of you would do, but you like pottery, so you're gonna go do it, or photography, go buy a $500 camera, be intentional, take a lesson,
Yep.
take a class. Things will lead you places you can't imagine, decisions, and especially when you get out of your ordinary cycle of life.
Yep.
Um, which I think you found as well. Writing the book and sharing it, you had no idea that you'd end up being a public speaker and people would want to hear your story.
Yeah. I like the way
Crazy.
I like the way you just framed that, though. It's like the unfinished business.
It's unfinished business for me.
Go do that thing. It's unfinished business. I think that's great.
Hey, you're
No
supposed.
time like the present. Yeah.
There's a reason it's in your head.
Yeah.
There's a reason it's in your head. Let's grab one more question, Terry.
I love that.
See where this takes us, and I'll give you some time. Maybe let's, depending upon the question, you can you can kind of blend it into the last. Let's see. Oh, okay. So this is a good version, an iteration of the question we've kind of asked, and I'll let you take it how you want to take it. So, a question from the jar for Terry. How would you start to give back if you started tomorrow?
If I started tomorrow.
Yeah. How would you start to give back if you started tomorrow?
So I would say that the answer to that is I'm very blessed right now. So I'm probably close to your age. I decided to retire, quote unquote retire. I wouldn't call it retirement, but stop working in the high-tech field so that I could dedicate myself because I can to this newfound purpose that I developed, 30 years ago of speaking to speaking to more audiences, getting my book out there, doing more kind of philanthropy from the standpoint of not just financial, but being able to help some of these nonprofits with important missions and work that they're trying to accomplish. So that's where I'm heading now. And so I feel really blessed that I could say, well, that's not tomorrow. I'm doing it right now.
I love it.
And I hope that I can continue to do that.
I think you're on the right path now. My sense is I'd encourage you to 100% dive into it. One is you're great for it, and the other one is it's super, super, ikigiri, the Japanese term ikigiri, and I think that's your spot.
Yeah,
people need it. You're good at it. They'll pay you for it, and it provides value.
Yeah,
it's super sweet spot. It's your gift.
Yeah, and what a crime not to use it and to help other people. I mean, like you asked earlier, like even if there is just one person that's affected, impacted, then it's worth it each time, right?
It's the Charlie,
and you never know. It's always going to be that person that you least expect. These events that happen in our lives are never what we expect. The inspirations that we gain are rarely things that we would ever anticipate. So,
it's a Charlie Rose interviewing Mr. Rogers, kind of at the end of his career, and I think it might have been a retirement interview. And he was asked, just telling him, what does it feel like to, you've been a father, a come home from school kind of latchkey kid father for millions of children. And, you've touched so many, what does it feel like? And he's so humble, right? He just says, I don't know about all that, but if I just touched one young person, it would all be worth it.
Yeah. Yep.
It's just powerful when you think, just has to be one. And, you've got at least you got the one.
Yeah.
So this is your, I think, Terry, so you're on your third act. I borrowed this from one of my first guests on the jar. Kind of shared with me she's on her third act. And I thought, man, that's me. I'm on my third act. I don't know what it's going to, it's the climax of the other two. It's everything the other two were, couldn't be, right? They couldn't
Yeah.
be this act,
Yeah.
and they're the setup, and they're the rewards for the first two. So congratulations on. I love the fact you're leaning into it more and
Yeah.
more. And when's the
And
last
to
day?
your,
Are you, are you done?
sorry.
Are you done? Is the corporate done? Or are you just getting into it?
Well, I did leave the corporate world about 8 months ago
Okay.
officially, but
Okay.
as you would expect, I got sort of pulled back in with some consulting work, and now I'm getting pulled back in with more consulting work. And honestly, that's okay. It's if I can balance that and have the time,
Yes. Yeah.
um, I think that keeps me grounded too. I like having a lot of stuff going on. I don't want to
Okay.
ever feel like I'm getting bored. So it's good to, test the brain out and gain some more knowledge somewhere else. And as long as I have time to dedicate what I want to do, I'm happy.
How about some closing? You had something you were going to say before I jumped in there, and then maybe ask you to think about any kind of
Oh,
closing.
I think I was just going to say, you talked about the third act. I was just going to say, I talk a lot about this too, embracing change, right? A lot of people are afraid of change. And you and I were both in the corporate world where it's just constant. I mean, reorganizations are constant.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just not comfortable with that. And it's like, I think to myself, why did you go into this industry? Why did you go into high tech if you ever thought that it was going to be like this stable, oh, I got to work here and I'm going to be 35 years later working for this company? No, it's not going to happen. You're going to have a completely different path. Your job's going to change. Your company will likely change many times. But
Yeah.
the reason I say embrace change is not just about work, but I think to your point, like your third act, sometimes we don't know where we're going to land. We don't know what's going to happen. But if you believe in yourself and you believe that you're going to work through it, if you can get to that place, it's exciting. I think of change as exciting. It's like,
Oh
I
yeah.
don't fear it. I don't lay in bed going, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's like, I look forward to the next day. It's like, shoot, what am I going to learn tomorrow that's going to take me on this path that I don't know where I'm going? That's cool.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, but some closing thoughts. Maybe any message for the audience, or any thoughts you want to leave behind for yourself, for for next time.
I think we touched on this, Ken, but I think I just, I always say that try to remain open, aware, and attentive to what's going on and around you, because you never know
Mm,
where you're going to get the inspiration that may change your life in a positive direction. You don't have to accept every potential inspiration as life changing, but if you can be open minded and then take a little bit of time each day, maybe at the end of your day, to reflect on what you learned today, by being more open, having these conversations with people, the things you did at your trade show this week. I mean,
yeah.
that's the gift, right? That, I think that's incredible what you were doing, talking to people, learning about people, and gaining insights that maybe you didn't have last week. So that's
Yeah.
all I would say is just try not to be oblivious. Try to live. Try to be intentional each day.
I love it. And if change, if you're crazy a little bit like us, you'll make change happen for you, for yourself. And don't wait for the universe to affect change for
No,
you.
no,
Because it's coming for you. I guess
it is coming.
the message for me is, for the audience, is it's coming for you. And you might as well be a little bit, remotely in charge, very remotely in control of the change, or at least you can say you initiated it.
Yeah,
um and then
totally.
it's still going to turn out to be what it's going to, you're going to not have much control on that part, but at
Yeah,
least you can start the change. Like I said, go buy a guitar, talk to the stranger in that, when you're shopping, go start pottery, do a book club, volunteer at the
yeah,
library, whatever that is. Go do something
yeah.
different and see where it leads.
Those little moments can be life changing, and you can help other people.
Absolutely.
You make them feel good, and that makes you feel good, right? Simple
Yeah.
things. It just happened 2 days ago. I went to the store to fill up my water bottles, the big 5-gallon
Yeah.
jugs. And here's this mother and daughter hauling like 8 of these bottles, trying to get them in their car. And I stepped out and I'm like, hey, I'm happy to help you. Do you guys need some help? And they were too proud in a way. But this girl was like blown away that I offered to help them. And she's like, oh my God, thank you so much. And
I
then
love it.
as I backed up and went away, she's like waving at me saying, thank you. And it was
And
like such a simple thing.
recognizing people struggling, and offering a hand.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Simple things. Yeah.
Terry, thanks so much for spending an hour with me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. I enjoyed our conversation and appreciate your time.
Yeah. And hang around for 10 seconds. I'll see you on the other side.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everybody,
Sounds
for
good.
listening to The Humanist, supporting the show. If you're on an audio version, just drop down to below and give us a few stars. And if you're super motivated or super upset by something we said, that's great. Write it down, make a comment. I love all the comments and read all those. Terry, see you in 10 seconds. Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the intricacies of workplace dynamics. All right.